And we're on. Hey, Pinkies. So I have a very special guest today. I have JT Tran, who is the creator of the ABCs of Attraction, which is a coaching service specifically to help Asian men get out there and get their dating on, get their girls, how to mac right, whatever. The reason why I wanted to talk to you, JT, and thank you for agreeing to meet with me, because I just
Thank you for
found you
asking.
on TikTok, and you gave some really good advice. And it's been a long time though since I've actually interviewed Asian men about the dating preferences, what Black women and Asian men have in common. I think we know what those things are. Remember that notorious OkCupid study that said that Black women and Asian men were the least desired. And
Right.
it's kind of sad because I'm looking at the both of us, JT, and I'm thinking we look pretty good.
Welcome to the Watered Body Care Ritual, the world's first multi-step face and body care system designed specifically for women of deeper skin tones. Say hello to a more radiant, smooth, and even complexion. Try Watered Body Care today and experience the power of natural, spa-grade ingredients designed specifically for women of deeper skin tones.
So what's going on here?
Thank you. Thank you. You look good too.
So what inspired you to want to coach specifically Asian men on how to date?
Well, I mean, I was a late bloomer like a lot of my Asian brethren. I think statistically, most Asian guys and Asian American specifically don't start dating until we're like 20, and that's pretty typical. And coming from there, I was aerospace engineer, good job and everything like that. I found that only on paper was I a good boyfriend, like not
Mm,
in real life, simply because I didn't have like the social and communication skills. So actually, I had to learn it,
mhm.
trial and error, and like looking for all the various resources until like I started up a blog called the Asian Playboy blog, which recorded my adventures and my misadventures, right? And then
Mhm.
one day, this Chinese Canadian mother called me up to help out her son, who had been harassed by neo Nazis in high school. And she said, like, "Hey, I will fly you out here, get you a hotel, if you can teach my son, how to make friends, get a girlfriend, and I'll pay you." I was like, "What?"
And
Like
you're
this?
like, let me figure out what
Yeah.
books do I need to.
Yeah, this hobby that started with
Mhm.
helping myself became a call to service, especially for my Asian brothers, because that was literally my first like real client, was this Chinese Canadian high school kid who had been like beat up by neo Nazis, and he just kind of sheltered down into himself. And I knew that I couldn't simply just teach him like the macking skills, right, or the pickup artistry, because he was like 18, and I needed a way to teach him that was both effective and practical, but would allow him to grow into himself, because I wasn't trying to clone myself onto him, right? I
Mhm.
didn't simply want to give him like, oh, just memorize these things, memorize these lines, and it'll work. And, because that's very constraining for someone that is still trying to figure out his own identity and masculinity. So, it was both giving him enough training wheels, but also like giving like a holistic instruction where give him inner game, outer game, and verbal game, where it needed to be practical, but it needed to be flexible enough for him to grow into as a man. So yeah, that's how I started ABCs.
And are you still in touch? Were you able to transform him?
Last I heard, he was getting married, so he was like
That's
graduating college.
awesome. That's
Yeah,
great. That's great. So we both know that Asian men in particular have gotten a bad rap, especially here in America. Black women, we are in the same boat. But there's been some recent developments when it comes to when I first started having these conversations about men dating choices. particularly for Black women, options for Black women. Asian men were on the table. And at the time, there was a kind of like, I don't know, I don't think Asian men are really that interested, or maybe a very select few, or maybe there's some issues that are going on culturally that just aren't as compatible. That was back in 2012 when my book Swirling came out. There's been a lot of progress, right, in terms of the I think the profile of both Black women and Asian men. Like, you guys are, I think that there are certain elements in our cultural zeitgeist that is really facilitating for you guys to kind of come into your own. Has the narratives, do you find that they're evolving in terms of from when that OK Cupid Steady came out to now?
Well, in like any kind of social movement, it's in flux, right? It's like a matter of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yes, there has been a kind of flooding of like Korean and Chinese culture, like K-pop, that has made a lot more of a kind of awareness of that there is alternative forms of masculinity, and it isn't just simply the Western form of masculinity. So that has opened up, I guess, more romantic opportunities kind of across the spectrum. But at the same time, like with COVID, there has been reinforced or an introduction of like a new stereotype that Asians were like disease carriers. Like when COVID was happening, like some of these clubs wouldn't let us in, right? They were literally just saw like a bunch of like Asian guys, like even if we bought a table, they would be like, no, like, we're Chinese, even though we're not, right?
Wow.
So it has been a matter of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right?
Yeah.
Has the Overton window kind of opened? Yes. But has there been other pushback? Has there been pushback in other areas and racism? Of course.
Yeah.
But again, any social movement, it's dynamic, right? So is it better in a lot of ways? Yes, I would say. In other ways, not so much.
Right. So I want to talk about Asian women. And we talked a little bit about this before we talked, because the reason why I found you was because I was kind of researching what is it about, why are Asian women, just in general, in the past, say, 50 years, married out so much?
Hey ladies, if you think this is hella interesting, just wait. In our private group, we are covering how Asian women divested, but this is not a conversation for public consumption. If you are in the Pink Pill Underground, you will hear all about it in this multi-event series. If not, there's a link to apply. Make sure you do. You won't want to miss it.
And I was so very curious to know what Asian men think about how American Asian women across your diaspora are choosing men who are not Asian. I want to know how you feel about it, what the Asian guys feel about it, and how what you're telling Asian guys who feel like a significant amount of their dating and marriage pool is not available because they're dating other people. How have you handled that?
Right. So for context for those watching, the statistics according to the Pew Research Center is that 54%, that's literally over half, 54% of American-born Asian women will outmarry. Right, that's over half of American-born Asian women will outmarry. And something out of 1 out of 5 Asian American men will never marry. So there is this sort of like shrinking dating pool, so to speak. And like growing up, it was a phenomenon that is very vigorously discussed and argued ad nauseum in the Asian American community. As I'm sure you have your various discussions in your community. So it is well known. It is well known, and I don't want to say like, we're gonna dictate the choices of Asian women or like police their dating choices. Like, love whom you love, but let's not simply gloss over the fact that there is racism at play. There is a power dynamic at play, right?
Do you think that Asian women are trying to tap into power dynamic by pairing off with other races of men that they feel are more?
Well, I mean, if you look at history, from the anti-miscegenation law that barred Asian men from marrying American women, or if they did marry an American woman, there was a good probability that she would lose her citizenship. Like that literally happened, right?
Mhm.
Where an American woman married an Asian guy and lost her citizenship because of that. And then you have like the War Bride Act that encouraged U.S. GIs and other Western allies to marry Asian women, and in a lot of cases, it was a net benefit, right? You're taking people from a war-torn country or like a third world country, and going to a first world country, and that is obviously a benefit, but that does create a sort of like
Like a
mentality,
vacuum for the men?
a
Towards
vacuum for the men, but also a
Mhm.
mentality that for Asian women that white is better, right? You get that kind of that white adjacent privilege, if you will. Like you change your last name, right? Like Asian marriage rituals, typically you don't change your last name, right? But if an Asian woman changes her last name, all of a sudden she's Jane Smith, and now she might have more opportunities for jobs and you know uh, higher salaries, or police protection, or I've heard Asian women literally say like they are safer. They feel safer in white spaces with a white man, right?
Now, I wanted to ask you about that in particular because one of the arguments is that I've heard, and we'll get into it from our side because we have similar things, maybe not to the degree, but a lot of Asian women are saying that their culture is so oppressive to them in terms of highly patriarchal, in terms of not being able to sort of navigate in a way of freedom that they might be able to if they were not married within the community. Also, the obligation, the tradition of the husband's parents moving in, and then the Asian woman, the wife, having to take care of the parents and that sort of thing, and that like that those issues are some of the things that they're saying. We're not, you know, Asian women aren't treated so great. So we're going where the options might be more favorable. What do you say to that?
Sure. When you have, the motherland culture that is more conservative or of a different religion, or even like third world country. I think we kind of mentioned this, like China.
Mhm.
While there is this impression like, oh, China is big and is powerful, like not too long ago, they were like full on third world country, right?
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
where a lot of the immigrants came over to America, was they were middle class, right? That's one of the
Mhm.
things that one has to take into context is the discussions that are being had in Asian America aren't from like motherland Asians. It's the privileged Asians that immigrated here who had the money, the political connections, unless you
And
read
the
their
education.
right.
Mhm.
And so like, oh, we're more westernized. We expect Western framework of relationships and not how it is over there. Right.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you might make an argument like, oh, I want the Western form of marriage as opposed to like the Eastern form. But it's their culture. Like I'm Asian American, and while Vietnamese specifically, I'm not going to dictate to an entire country how they run their lives and their
Mhm.
traditions, right?
Mhm.
Are there things that could be better? Absolutely. And changes are being made over there, right? When you lift like hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in China, and that was within the last decade or two, yeah, maybe they aren't as progressive or egalitarian as say like the United States, but that's because like a decade or two ago, people were starving,
Right.
right? There's only so much
They
progress.
had bigger problems to worry about then.
Yeah, you got to understand like the context of it,
Mhm.
right? But also, I do want to also push back on that being a dating coach and all that here in the West is the West, the United States, has a capitalistic form of romance and love, you know, kind of Disneyfied, Hallmark. It's like, oh, there's only this one soulmate, and you have to display it in this kind of fashion. It's like love languages. Like different people,
Mhm.
different cultures have different forms of expressing love and romance. Like Japan, Vietnam, we don't have like the one-to-one literal translation of like romantic "I love you," right? They're like it
Really?
doesn't exist in a exact translation. Does romantic love exist? Of course. Does familial love exist? Of course. But in just even language, right, it isn't the exact same as how you think as American English versus whether it's like Japanese or Vietnamese. Like the love, like in language form, is different. And so,
It's interesting.
one has to take that into context and simply saying like, hey, yeah, maybe you like Western form of romance because that's what you were raised with, but let's acknowledge while Asia might be imperfect, let's also acknowledge the West is woefully imperfect as well when it comes to romance and love.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, listen, we're having a conversation together because it ain't perfect. So,
Yeah.
um, are Asian men angry? Now, let me ask you, let me tell you why I asked this question. I was one of the first Black women to be in the public square telling Black women, hey, you need to be looking at other races of men. You need to be looking at Asian men, you need to be looking at Hispanic men, you need to be looking at white men,
Same
because
here. Same here, sister.
we have a unique set of problems. The same thing. Your problems are unique to your community here in the United States. Black women have a unique issue where, I mean, literally everything is flipped. So the men, while it's not 54% marrying, but the Black men who do marry in the community, and it's small, I think it's like in the low 40s, there's a significant amount of them who marry interracially, and date exclusively interracially, marry interracially. So everything is sort of flipped. But for us as Black women, we get a lot of pushback, a lot of hate
Hmm.
from the community as a whole. Black men, I mean, I can kind of understand it. They kind of want all the goodies to themselves, but the community as a whole kind of looks down to it, looks down on it. But the alternatives are so horrific. So if a Black woman doesn't get married and she wants to have children, she's going to be a single mom. You know, she's going to have to do everything. And these outcomes for single parents just aren't that great when you don't have a lot of support and you don't have the resources and things like that. So it behooves Black women to expand their options so they can have the very best chance of finding a good mate. The issue is we get a lot of hate
Hmm.
from in the community. So I wanted to know, do you guys have a lot of resentment when it comes to Asian women doing, you know, what Black men do to us?
Right, right. Yeah. It's like both, right? There is that kind of angry Asian man or bitter Asian man
I have
stereotype.
not seen one. I need to look at, like, what does this sound? Does he call her names? I mean, like, I've never seen. I don't see them.
Well, I mean, there are definitely Asian guys growing up, and I, in college was like angry, like that typical angry Asian guy, where you could just look around and you just saw constantly this imagery, not only in the media that was constantly repeated, but in real life, where if you're a white guy and there are Asian women around, like that's the
They're gonna be
you
like,
know yeah,
ah, Brad,
exactly, exactly. And so there were a lot of guys that grew up with that imagery, and that also, it wasn't simply that Asian women were pursuing white men. It was that there is a small, it's not tiny, right? They're vocal and they're influential, um, of Asian women that marry or pursue and encourage white men specifically because of the belief that Asian identity is inferior, right?
Mhm,
If you sort
mhm.
of look at the Asian American produced cinema and literature, right? What's the couple of the last biggest Asian American movies you can name off the top of your head?
The first two is like Parasites and Crazy Rich Asians.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Crazy Rich Asians, somewhere everything all at once.
Yes. Oh, I did see that too. Yes. Yes.
Both written by Asian men, right? Both
Really?
written by Asian men, and especially Crazy Rich Asians. It's an Asian man pursuing an Asian woman, right? And you see the sort of celebration of this Asian identity. I mean, yeah, it's like rich Asians, but it's like, hey, that's pretty
It's
fucking
a
cool,
fairy tale. It gives like the
right?
yeah.
But if you look at, and it's not all of Asian female cinema or Asian female created cinema, but it's a trend from Joy Luck Club to what was the one on Netflix?
Memoirs of a
Um,
Geisha. I mean, I don't know. Was that also
that was
written
the
by?
white guy that made that.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple on Netflix, right? And I forget the name of it, but it's basically like these Korean adoptees. They kind of, the older sister pursuing like the white guy, and they happen to watch the old time movie Tiffany's Breakfast at Tiffany's, right? And there's that one part where Mick Rooney is in like the yellow face and the
Yes.
glasses.
Oh, it was awful.
Right.
Yes.
And the white guy is like, hey, isn't this kind of wrong? And the agent goes like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like Gregory Peck is hot, right? And you see this where like when Asian men, not all, but you can see the trend, make the movies, the books, it's Asian identity doesn't suck. There may be difficulties, but it doesn't suck. While you say the Joy Luck Club, it's like it's terrible to be Asian, and she ends up with a white guy, right? That's a difference. The way I talk to my students is like, I want you to date everyone, Latina, Black, white, Asian. Just open up your dating options, right?
Right.
So that's So to their anger, I say, when you are getting yours, when you are making your money, when you are getting laid, getting a girlfriend, getting married, when you are happy, you just stop caring about other people's bullshit, right?
You don't
So
care
we,
about who doesn't want you because you're so busy focusing on the people who do.
yeah,
And that's very similar to the messages that that I give as well, because Black women in this country, we were also seen as lower status for relationship options. That's changing a lot. I mean, it's changing from when I first started to now. I think that people are just sort of opening our eyes. I think even Black women are opening their eyes to people who they otherwise thought weren't interested. I thought, and this is probably related to just custom, is I didn't think Asian men were interested in me in particular, the way I look as a Black woman, because they never look you like if I didn't know them, they wouldn't even look at me. Like you wouldn't even look at me. No looking at. And then I found out I was like, well, it's considered impolite to look at people in the eye if you don't know. So it's the way in which you guys approach is very different. So when you do your coaching for Asian men, do you coach them on how different cultures respond to different types of overtures? Like with a Black woman, you got to damn near, poke her in the shoulder and say, I'm interested. You want to go out? Especially if you're non-Black, because they're going to just think you're being nice.
right. I definitely encourage my students to open up like their horizons, and they're different, like kind of like technical considerations. One of the big things I tell my Asian students, especially if they don't conform to a certain sort of like sexual archetype, right? If they're like short and unattractive or nerdy or whatnot, is the idea of being direct, like going up to a girl and saying, "Hey, I think you're beautiful," or whatever kind of romantic kind of compliment. Because when you're trying to approach a Black woman that has potentially, and let's be realistic, the majority of Black women have never dated an Asian guy, right?
Yeah, more majorities have very little. American, African, y'all are cleaning up over there.
Right.
I mean, can we talk about that too in a little bit? But yes. here in
Right, I was about to say like China, Africa, right? Those
Yeah,
relations.
I mean, this is about to be a family reunion. Like, it's going to be a very interesting family reunion in the next 20 years. But anyway,
Yeah. But basically, if an Asian guy is trying to date outside of his race, I strongly encourage the more direct form, like going up to girls that like, I think you're beautiful, or I love your red dress, you're very confident, in some way that is much more direct, masculine, and really broaches the idea of breaking any kind of heuristic thinking. That I am a romantic individual, and I want you to think of me as a romantic individual and not like a stereotype, even if I'm like, short and Asian and all of that. And I definitely tell my students, like, African American women are very receptive, surprisingly receptive to Asian men approaching them. Now, are there obstacles like mental, cultural? Absolutely. I once had a student like turn to me and like, but that guy's gonna beat me up. I'm like, who are you talking about? And he pointed to this black bouncer. I'm like, she's not with him. Like, right? But is that perception? Like, if I
right,
talk to a black woman, some black guy's gonna beat me up, right? And you have to understand, like, Asian isn't like a this monolith. Like, I teach Asian American, I teach like Asian, right? And I teach those who are like have recently moved to America and just slowly trying to get used to American culture. And so there are varying degrees of like cultural knowledge when it comes to like all the different cultures and races in America, right? Someone straight from Japan who has never ever seen a black person in their entire life, it's they have to wrap their mind around it,
right, exactly.
right? And it's different from say like a Vietnamese Hmong, American who has been raised in areas where they're exposed to a lot of different cultures, right? Or maybe in like a kind of lower kind of economic status, and they get to befriend all these other types of people that aren't Asian. Like they're more used to it, right? And they're
Mhm.
more used to like spitting that game, so to speak. But someone that's straight from the motherland has zero idea of how to date outside of their race, right? But yeah, I definitely encourage and say like for Asian guys, be more direct.
Oh, for sure. And I co-sign that completely. But let's talk about China for a second. And let's talk about how there's just this huge influx of China, Chinese men going over to various countries on the continent of Africa for work, and increasingly doing business over there, and they're finding love. How much of that we suspect in our community is because in China, the one child policy
Hmm.
took out a lot of prospects for marriageable girls in this generation because of what happened a few decades. Um, and so they're going over to these specific countries in Africa, and they're marrying the women to the point where the actual people of the country, leaders of the country, are like, wait a minute, y'all are marrying all our women. What is going on? Like, do you have insight particularly on what is happening? And I have a follow-up question about that too. So
Sure. I mean, basically, for context, like China and other countries, South Korea, are investing in these countries, building up infrastructure, roads, and you know, you're having these expat immigrant workers. I mean, I think the African countries that are recipients of are building their infrastructure, getting exposed to, Asian people. And I think it is a natural byproduct of people meeting and getting used to one another. Will there be conflict and friction? Obviously, right? But it's a little bit different than let's say France or any kind of Western country, giving out loans to Africa. Like, USA gives out these loans. You don't see white guys traveling to Africa to build these roads in the desert. But you
mhm,
see like Asians do it. Like,
mhm, mhm.
they're in Africa or like, wherever doing the work. And you're right. There is a very lopsided gender disparity. What is it, like 2050? It'll reach like this massive tipping point, where there would simply be like I mean, it's already, the pressure cooker is already on, right? But in 2050, it's going to reach like astronomical like proportions. And so I think it's just natural for there to be, to the stress, the steam to be released into neighboring countries. And I think it's a good thing, right? If, Africa and Asian countries are, having beneficial relations economically, culturally, that will follow up as well.
And there's a
There's
lot of
always going to be friction and cultural differences, but it's happening.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of commonalities in terms of like taking care of your elders, respecting your elders, taking care of your family, being very family oriented, being very communal. Like there's a lot that, Africans and I think, Asians have in common from the continent, I think.
I was about to say, there's a very famous, it's not, I mean, you can find her on TikTok, but like they're famous, what's the Chinese app?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think her name is Rose, right? She married and then basically like the farm life. Like that's the thing here, and like in America, like, oh, I don't want to be a farmer. I'm like, I'm white collar Asian American. I don't want to go to no farm. Like, there's nothing wrong with being a farmer. Like it's honest work, right? And she's famous, right? And it's like so long as the man treats her right and honest, and they have a good relationship. So it is definitely.
I love a farmer. I love the garden. I love growing my own food. I would love a farmer. What's his number? I'm just kidding. Now, in terms of racism, because this is going to be a touchy subject, we got to get in it because Asians have been accused of being racist towards Black people.
Sure.
Black people, I know for a fact, have been racist against Asian people. How do you feel like the stereotypes that we both have affect how people who you coach approach particularly Black women? Like, do you find that there's too much mistrust and racism, or how does that go? Because I know that here's one issue in particular that I know if I don't ask, people are going to be mad at me. They're going to be mad that I didn't ask this question. When it comes to colorism, Asians, you guys are, Black people are the same team. Y'all are in the group. You are in the soup of the colorism thing of like wanting your children to be lighter, wanting your partner to be lighter. That it's for us, it's different. It's more proximity to whiteness. Why light skin is that? But for you guys, from what I understand, it was more towards, well, you're not working outside. That means that you live a nice life. Yeah. But in either case, whatever the reason, whether it's proximity to whiteness or because you don't have to work outside, these are very real issues that can disqualify a huge swath of people. So what do you say to that?
Racism exists, colorism exists in the Asian community, without a doubt. It's different. I think a lot of people equate like, oh, Asian racism is the same thing as like, white people being racist. It's not, right?
How's it different?
Asians aren't going to go like culturally violent, right? You could travel through Asia and people may stare at you, but you'll 99.9%, unless you go to North Korea or something like that, right? You'll physically be safe. You might be ostracized, but you will physically be safe.
Right. They're not going to be throwing rotten tomatoes at you or anything.
Yeah. They're like, the police might look at you, because you're different. They've never seen a Black person, but you'll physically be safe, right? Now, you might be lonely, right? But it's different. Now, again, it's still prejudice, but, let's not put the same bucket of the historic systematic racism of America as someone equating the same thing as Asia. In Asia, a lot of these people have literally never ever seen anyone that was different from them. Right. But they weren't raised in this belief system that like, oh, people of different colors are inherently kind of like, inferior. Like, they didn't have that sort of like eugenics kind of Nazism, right? But also like On both sides, there is like there's a different standard of the beauty standard, right?
Mhm.
You mentioned like colorism, but there's also like in America especially like heightism, right? Like the average height of the Asian American male is below average, considered to like white males, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I, as an Asian man, fit no one's like ideal representation of a boyfriend, right? Um, and the same thing is like when you have like Asian guys, their standard of beauty is a certain type of like Asian woman, and black women typically
We're like
are
on the
different.
opposite end of the spectrum.
Right. It's same thing. Like
Mhm.
if you probably or like the majority of women look for a guy that's taller than me. I'm 5'5". I wish I
Well,
was
you're
born
taller than
taller.
me. I'm 5'3", so.
Yeah. Right. But as a woman, you're typically gonna look for a taller
Mhm.
guy, right?
Mhm.
And so in both cases, we don't fit each other's standard of beauty, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so there is that sort of like struggle. Um, and as you mentioned early on in the show, that this perception has been changing. I have been seeing a lot more like black African women getting into K-pop, right?
Oh,
And
for
yeah,
sure.
dating Asian guys. Has there been like pushback and racism and colorism from some segments of the Asian community against that? Absolutely, right?
Mhm.
But it is slowly changing. But also, I think it's important to understand, like as Asians, we're not monolithic. So
Mhm.
the Asian American experience is going to be very different from like the Asian experience, right? So I think there's a lot of confusion where people are like, "Oh, it's Asian." Like the way Asian motherlanders like think about people of other races is going to be different than like Asian
Right,
Americans born here. And
right.
so there's that kind of confusion. Like when you look at an Asian person on the street, you don't know if they're international Asian or like Asian American. And so it can be very confusing how to navigate that, right? It's like when, people ask, oh, like, where are you from? Like for Asian Americans, it's offensive. For an Asian person, it's a compliment, right?
Mhm.
Because it's showing appreciation for the culture. And so
Mhm.
there's all that sort of like very nuanced, and people trying to fit into the Asian American community. Like God, Buddha bless you guys, but it is confusing. I'll be the first to admit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the same thing with Black Americans. I mean, we've got a whole continent too, and with a whole bunch of different countries, and it is what it is. So, but here's the thing: if you were to be coaching me to date an Asian guy,
Okay.
I'm fairly outgoing, a little bit introverted, but I can get out there and ask for what I want. What would you say to Black women who wanted to date Asian guys? What advice would you give them?
Couple of things. One, Asian dating culture is what we call more indirect and social circle oriented, right?
So groups of friends
Right.
dating. Hmm.
You to go up to a guy would only work if he's like for sure Asian American, right?
Okay.
If he was like, like 6 foot tall, and you could tell by the way he dressed, by the way he acted, like, seemed confident and social outgoing, you could make that move and approach him, right? And like, oh, what's a a good drink or something like that, and kind of hint your way towards that. But that's because he's Asian American and he's used to that sort of style of dating, and you have that sort of like common like dating language. If you
Hmm.
don't know, and it's obviously hard to tell just by looking at us Asians, right? We're probably going to be in a group of friends, guys and girls. So your
Hmm.
best bet is to befriend the group and ingratiate yourself through the friend group, and then start talking to the guy that
You
you're
gotta be
interested
strategic. You gotta like have a plan. You gotta have a
in.
long game plan.
It's strategic, but also it is super, super common. That's the way a lot of like Koreans and Chinese date is through their friend group, right?
Mhm.
It's dating apps aren't as popular. It's growing in more popularity, but it isn't as popular. Cold approaching, like what I teach is like a guy coming up to a girl that they've never met before, introducing themselves. That's pretty rare, right? The most common for Asians, including Asian American too, is social circle style, where you befriend the friends, and maybe you suss out the situation and then you hang out with that person. It isn't as like fast, if you will, as Americans are used to. But one might also argue because it is a slow burn, you know might be more geared towards a relationship style as opposed to like, hey, there's a girl I want, I'm gonna take her home, one night stand kind of thing, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing a meetup with like Asian guys and like specific different, races of women in America? Have you ever done that? Because I know you do like the demonstrations. I've seen them, but have you ever
Right, right.
done it where?
I mean, I do, and I prefer live training. There are like various matchmakers and speed dating. Like I don't find that because I mean I consider myself more like a self development coach, right? I
Mhm.
firmly believe that if I teach a man how to fish, he'll be fed for a lifetime.
Right.
We just
Mhm.
have these little parties. The guy still has to show up and talk to the girl, right? He still has to have personality and charm. And if he is still awkward or creepy, it doesn't matter if, there's a party with like, three times as many girls, right?
Mhm.
Um, that just fits the way I approach life and the way I want to help my fellow Asian brothers. I think others have tried to do that. It takes someone that is far more of a party person than I have the temperament for to
Mhm.
organize something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot. Trust me. Okay, so final question. You said you've spoken at Harvard and all these places. What? Why? What were you talking about?
Um, yeah, I mean, it all kind of varied from Harvard to Yale. And I was, thankful enough that it typically ended up being some Asian American organization or fraternity wanted me to speak about the difficulties uh, of being Asian or specifically like Asian guys, because it is recognized that there is various systems at play of racism and internalized racism.
Hmm.
And obviously today's climate is a little bit more nuanced when it comes to like gender and sexual politics.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I am someone that can speak on that in a more nuanced fashion, but unfortunately, people in my industry do have a bad reputation. And so, it's too bad. But it's something I enjoy speaking about. But it's typically like, yeah, like, what kind of, sexualized, racism exists in the Asian American community.
Well, I mean, Harvard and Yale, you're legit. You get invited to Harvard and Yale, you're legit. That's enough for me. Sign me up. Thank you so much, JT, for this conversation. Is there anything that I missed asking that you think um, you should mention right now?
I mean, just that, while I have done like female oriented workshops, like just straight up honest, it's not my wheelhouse. I've like done it before when, someone asked and, I try my best, but I am definitely, out there to help out like men of color, like specifically Asian men, but I've helped out all types of guys. So
Mhm.
if anyone watching this has like a guy friend that needs some help, like look me up, ABCs of Attraction. So
Yes.
proof is in the pudding. Like I'm actually going to New York in a couple of weeks for my former student and who became a coach, now former coach for me. 10th anniversary with his wife. I had the great honor
That's
of
awesome.
officiating his wedding.
Oh
I,
my gosh.
I think I'm
You
the only dating coach that can actually say that.
So, in addition to being a coach, you can also officiate weddings. Like, okay.
Well, maybe I'm overstating. I presided. Like you have to be licensed to do this. I
So,
presided over it. I'm like, do you, William, take?
yeah.
So, so yeah. I mean, I've had that benefit, and he was a student, and then he became a coach when he got really good with girls, and he also realized like, hey, I want to settle down. I want to get married. I want to have a family, and now he's happily married. I'm going to his 10th anniversary, and he's got two beautiful kids, a boy and a girl.
Well, I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of men who are going to watch this. And I think that there'll be some that are going to be like, and there's going to be a lot of them who are going to be like, yeah. So I'm going to definitely post this to my socials. It's a very interesting topic.
There's
Um,
one,
Go ahead.
really quickly, I just posted maybe like a month ago the first marriage of my first African American student, a black man who
Really?
married
That's
a black woman.
awesome.
He was one of my students, and I saw. I was like, oh, that's so cool. So yeah.
Awesome.
So
That's
I teach black guys too. You know.
Yeah. So I mean, so you do it all. So that's, I mean, that's good. And I feel like, but I think that in general, women in general, American women are sleeping on Asian men because we just don't. We there. It's a community that is kind of far away from us to
It's
where
difficult
we
to
have to
navigate
make the
too.
effort to, you
Yeah.
know.
And
But
it is difficult to navigate because like the way you would treat an Asian American guy is subtly different than someone that's international Asian.
right.
And not every girl person is gonna know how to navigate it. And sorry in advance, ladies.
Right,
It is
exactly.
what it
Like,
is.
am I gonna need to know how to cook, the signature dishes? What do I do when I meet the mom? Like what? I mean, these are all questions that I know women would ask, but that's probably enough for, I mean, that's probably our second conversation if you decide to have it. But where can people find you? And what have you got going on so that people know?
Yeah, they can just find me on my primary website, the abcsofattraction.com. And basically, I run live training boot camps. We take gentlemen out in the field where we teach them both the classroom portion, full on like lecture, presentation, PowerPoint charts, 200-page workbook. You get homework without that. And we practice, and then we take you out in the field where I'll demonstrate approaches, talking to girls, and just show that it is not scary talking to a Latin girl. It's not scary talking to a black girl. It's not scary talking to a white girl. It's not scary talking to girls, period.
Mhm.
And we do boot camps. I'm going to New York in a couple weeks. We're primarily based out in Los Angeles. For those who are interested, check us out at the ABCs of Attraction, and you can get a free coaching call and just see what your goals are, see what your challenges are, and just see if we're a good fit for you.